when you're that person who can take your focus off of yourself and place it on serving others, discovering their needs, their wants, their desires, helping them solve their challenges and problems, helping move them closer to happiness.
Yep.
Well, people feel good about you. They feel great about you, right? They want to get to know you. They like you. They trust you. They want to be in relationship with you. They want to do business with you, and they want to tell the world about you, or what John and I call being your personal walking ambassadors.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Moeller Real Estate and Business Podcast. I'm your host, Phil Moeller, and on this podcast, we will be interviewing guests that have made their mark in real estate, in business, and in other areas of life. Listening to podcasts myself has helped me in so many different ways and continues to do so. If you're a real estate investor or an entrepreneur or aspiring to be either, or just someone that wants to learn, you've come to the right place. An easy way to have an impact is to share this episode with friends or family, provide a review, or just spread the word. We greatly appreciate it, and now let's get to the show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Moeller Real Estate and Business Podcast. I am so excited for today's guest. This gentleman has had a huge impact on me without knowing it. Bob Burg. Bob, how are you doing today?
Doing great, Phil. Thanks for having me with you.
Thanks for coming on and being so gracious with your time, Bob. So for our listeners, Bob has over 30 years has been showing entrepreneurs, leaders, and sales professionals how to communicate their value and accelerate their business growth. Bob, I also think personal growth. Bob is known for years, he was known for his sales classic, Endless Referrals, but his business parable, the book, The Go-Giver, which has changed kind of my thought process in my life in a lot of different ways. It was his next book and really what changed things for him, co-authored with John David Mann, and it's created a worldwide movement. And I'm excited to get more into that. Over 1 million copies sold into 30 different languages, the top 10 on Inc. magazine's list. And Bob, one of the most motivational books ever written, and a lot of other accolades. Bob, really, really impressive. So again, thanks for coming on. I read this book 10 years ago, and then again with a group of people maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and it had a great impact. So Bob, tell us what prompted all this? What prompted the Go-Giver? How did you come up with the idea or the thought or the book? How did that come about?
Well, many years ago, back in the 90s, I had a book called Endless Referrals, and the subtitle was Network Your Everyday Contacts into Sales. And it was basically a how-to book for entrepreneurs and salespeople who they believed in what they did. They knew they had a great product or service. It brought plenty of value to their customers and clients, but they didn't necessarily have the confidence or the comfort level to go out into their local communities and build the kinds of relationships with people where people would want to do business with them directly and or give them referrals. So it was really just a how-to step-by-step system for doing so. And personally, I define a system as the process of predictably achieving a goal based on a logical and specific set of how-to principles. So the key is predictability. If it's been proven that by doing A, you'll get the desired result of B, then you know all you need to do is A and continue to do A, and eventually you'll get the desired result of B. And that's what this was. It was based on a very basic premise I've been teaching for 35 years, maybe more, and that is that all things being equal, people will do business with and refer business to those people they know, like, and trust. So that was Endless Referrals. But again, it was a how-to book. And since I'd been in sales, I'd always enjoyed reading business parables, because parables are stories, right? And I think stories, we all know, they connect on a deeper level with people, on a more of a heart-to-heart level, and they can be shorter and so I always thought, it'd be great if we could take the basic ideas of Endless Referrals and turn it into a parable. Now, I'm not a a fiction writer. I'm not a story. Well, I can tell a story from stage, but because that's just something that happened, you tell the story. But
Right.
that's different than a work of fiction. So fortunately, so nothing happened with that idea. In the early 2000s, I had the great honor and privilege of meeting John David Mann, who was the editor-in-chief of a magazine I was writing a monthly column for. And even back then, he had a fantastic reputation as an excellent writer. And eventually, as we got to know each other, and I'd had this idea still in my head, I took it to him and just said, "Hey, John, I've got this idea for a story. It's not fleshed out in any way. There's nothing really. I would love for you to be the lead writer and storyteller, and we do this book together." And it took him a while to make the decision because he was still very busy at the time. But yeah, he fortunately said yes. And we wrote the book, and when I say we wrote it, believe me, he did the heavy lifting. This guy was he's such a wonderful storyteller and writer. The difficult thing was that it took a year and 24 rejections from major New York publishing houses before we finally had the 25th one say yes, and which was great because they turned out to be the perfect publishing partner.
Well, I'll say too. I mean, I've read the book a couple times. My 13-year-old daughter just recently read it and did a report on it, and it's just a
Oh,
super.
thank
It's
you.
an easy read, and it's again the parable. It's an easy read, but you can get your mind around. Like you can see it in real life. Again, it's a parable, but you can see how it can work in real life and the impact it can have. So, Bob, let's get into it a little bit. So, what is the premise of the book, and maybe even the 5 laws that you have in the book?
Well, really the premise is a very simple one, and that is that shifting your focus, and Phil, as you know, this is really where it all begins. Shifting your focus from getting to giving. Now, when we say giving in this context, we simply mean constantly and consistently providing immense value to others, understanding that doing so is not only a, a more fulfilling way of conducting business, it's the most financially profitable way as well. And not for any kind of, woo-woo, way out there, magical, mystical type of reasons. Oh, just give and do good things. No, nothing like that at all. It's actually very logical, it's very rational, and it ties in with human nature. And that is that when you're that person who can take your focus off of yourself and place it on serving others, discovering their needs, their wants, their desires, helping them solve their challenges and problems, helping move them closer to happiness.
Yep.
Well, people feel good about you. They feel great about you, right? They want to get to know you. They like you. They trust you. They want to be in relationship with you. They want to do business with you, and they want to tell the world about you, or what John and I call being your personal walking ambassadors. So
Yep.
that's what everything begins and ends with. Now, the 5 laws are the laws of value, compensation, influence, authenticity, and receptivity. And again, if you'd like, we can go through those.
Yeah. So first of all, I posted this, but on LinkedIn, but personal walking ambassadors is a great phrase, and I think if you do this over time, people run into situations where they might think of you and maybe, oh, Phil might want to know about that, or I'll connect Phil to that, or whatever it might be. So, and I've had examples of that. I've been fortunate. I'm not claiming that I have an army of personal walking
I'm sure you
ambassadors
have.
yet, but I have seen the impact of it. And now, but I want to go back to you have a personal walking group of ambassadors for you, but it's also fulfilling. And you talk about, we'll come back to the 5 laws, but you talk about like, why should we do this? Do we do this for profit? Do we do it to be fulfilled? Like, what is the reasoning behind why we should be a go giver?
Well, it's both. It's both. And a lot of the challenge people have, and we talk about this with the 5th law of receptivity, is what we call the treacherous dichotomy, or the false dilemma, which can be defined as the unnecessary use of the word or. Are you doing all these things because you're a great humanitarian who just doesn't care about yourself, just wants to make the world a better place? Or are you some, person who cares about making money and supporting yourself and living a good, healthy lifestyle and being able to afford those things? Well, it's an and, right? You're doing it for both reasons. Now, the focus, though, needs to be on what you're providing, what the value you're giving. This is why John David Mann and I say that money is simply an echo of value, right? It's the thunder to value's lightning. But if you're in business, making money, making a profit is very, very important.
Yep.
Without it, you're not in business, and
Yep.
you're not able to do those things that having money allows you to do. So it's not an either or. Hopefully, you really genuinely care about making other people's lives better through what you do. And you know what? Many entrepreneurs and many salespeople, they do feel exactly that way. But
Yep.
here's the thing: even if you didn't, even if it was simply that you wanted to earn a whole lot of money and didn't really care about the value you were providing others, you've still got to provide value to them, right? Because, and I used to say this when I spoke at sales conferences all over the world. First thing I'd say, nobody's going to buy from you because you have a quota to meet.
Yep.
They're not going to buy from you because you want the money. And they're not even going to buy from you just because you're a nice person. People are going to buy from you. They're going to do business with you because they believe that they will be better off by doing so than by not doing so. So to the degree that you are able to bring value to others, even if that's not really even something that you care about doing, but to the degree that you do, that's the degree to which you're going to earn income. Now, the fact is this, though, because, we also talk about human nature. It's human nature to want to do good in the world, for the world. It's human nature to want to be a part of something bigger than ourselves. It's human nature to want to feel as though we're bringing value to other people, that we're bringing value to life, okay, itself. And so there really need not be any dichotomy there. It's
What
both.
so your first law, the law of value, right? So like, I don't know if the best way to ask this, should we define value? How do we give value?
Sure.
Tell us more about what that means.
So the law of value itself says your true worth, in the business sense, of course, your true worth is determined by how much more you give in value than you receive in payment. But this sounds kind of counterintuitive, doesn't it? Give more in value than I take in payment. That sounds like a recipe for bankruptcy. So to understand this, we need to understand the difference between price and value. So price is a dollar figure, right? It's a dollar amount. It's finite. It simply is what it is. Value, on the other hand, is the relative worth or desirability of a thing, of something, to the end user or beholder. In other words, Phil, what is it about this thing? This product, this service, this concept, this idea, this what have you, that brings so much worth to another person that they will willingly exchange their money for it and be glad that they did, while you make a very healthy profit. Let's take a very quick. Oh, go ahead. Did you have a
Well, I was
question?
just gonna, and maybe this is where you're going, but like we take an example, we're selling a widget or a product or something.
Right.
Okay, that product in and of itself is a component in a bigger system, whatever it might be. But
Uh-huh.
how do we add way more value to the relationship than the product we're providing? And maybe, and if you were going in a different direction, that's fine too. But that's what came to mind for me.
No, that's fine, because even the intrinsic value of your product or service has to give them more in value than what you take in payment. So, for example, you hire an accountant to do your taxes, and she charges you $1,000. That's her fee or her price. But what value does she provide? Just again, intrinsically, by what she does, she's able to save you $5,000 in taxes. She provides you, or she saves you countless hours of time. She provides you and your family with the security and the peace of mind of knowing it was done correctly. So just by what she was able to do, she gave you well over $5,000 in value in exchange for $1,000 fee or price. She gave you more in value than she took in payment. You felt great about it, and she also made a very healthy profit. Okay, but
Yep.
now let's take your question, though. What can you do to add more? Because let's face it, every other accountant can claim to do the same thing. And to a large degree, most of them can if they're doing their job correctly. And if a prospective customer or client doesn't see any difference, if they don't know the difference between any two or more accountants,
Yep.
uh, you know, they don't know. And unless they can distinguish between any two or more accountants, it's always going to come down to what? Who has the lowest price or fee? And
Correct.
that's not a
Correct.
good way to do business. When you
Yep.
sell on low price, you're a commodity. When you sell on high value, you're a resource. To be able to sell on high value and be that resource, you've got to be positioned as distinct from your competition. Okay. So what do you do? Well, the short answer is you become that additional value, right? This is where the relationship comes in. And this is also understanding that, they're buying you before they're buying your product or service or company. Okay. So then the question is, so how do we do that? Well, the good news is there are dozens, if not hundreds of ways to communicate that additional value, but they tend to come down to five, what John and I call elements of
Okay.
value.
Okay.
And these elements of value are excellence, consistency, attention, empathy, and appreciation. And to the degree that you're able to communicate these, and we're talking about from the moment, not just in the selling process, from the moment you meet that person, Phil, rather whether it's an inbound call, whether it's outbound, whether it's through the internet, whether you meet them at some local event, from the moment you meet them, through the relationship building process, through the follow up and follow through the sales process, through the referral process, to the degree that you and your team members can communicate all five of those elements of value, that's the degree that you take low price and your competition out of the picture.
And what I like about that, so there's five elements of value so much is if I go back to a widget example or an account example, those products have a finite dollar value probably to them. All the
Right.
five elements that you just talked about, there, how do you even assign a value? There's infinite possibility of what value you can provide. So you completely changed the discussion and the price discussion because you're
Exactly.
just bringing so much value. If it's just in empathy, how much that there's not limits to those elements is what I like about it so much.
Right on. And then there's one more aspect of this that we've got to always keep in mind. And that is because remember, by the very nature of the thing, value is relative worth. It means that value is always in the eyes of the beholder.
Yep.
It's not what we think is of value or what we think they should think is of value. It's what they think is of value. And that's where we need to pay attention. We need to ask questions. We need to do our research. We need to discover and key in to what they hold to be of value.
So good. So we talked about the law of value is the first of the five laws of stratospheric success, as Bob and John talk about it. What is your other favorite, or what would be your top other, like what is your favorite law outside of value?
So I I don't know if there's a favorite law as much as maybe one that I relate to more.
Okay.
And we find that, because this is a great question and it comes up a lot, that everyone has their own law that they relate to the most, right? Mine is probably the law of influence. And that is, where it says your influence is determined by how abundantly you place other people's interests first. Now, again, very important to understand. When we say place the other person's interests first, we don't mean you should be a doormat. We don't mean you should be a martyr. And we don't mean you should be self sacrificial in any way. Absolutely not at all. It's as we talked about earlier. As Joe, the protege in the story, learned from several of the mentors, the golden rule of business, of sales, is that all things being equal, people will do business with and refer business to those people they know, like, and trust. Well, Phil, the quickest, the fastest, the most powerful way to elicit those types of feelings toward you and others is to genuinely move from that I focus or me focus to that other focus, looking to, as Sam, one of the mentors in the story, advised Joe, make your win all about the other person's win.
I like it. And I also like the point you made of just about the 5 laws and being relatable. And I can, as I went through these notes now versus what I probably thought about, if I read it the first time 7 years ago or
Right.
4 or 5 years ago, I was probably at a different time in my life where
Exactly.
what related to me was different based on my personal development journey, the career or profession or business I was in, different things. Like, so I think it's not just a book to read once, but then, come back to it, come back to your notes and see what's impactful at that time in your life.
I go through that with all the books that I reread. That I read them 5 years later, 10 years later, whatever, and it's like I see things that I highlighted and notes that I took, and I see notes things that I didn't do, and oh wow, that or this means so much, so much different to me now than it used to, or I'll sometimes even say, oh wow, I didn't realize I learned that here.
Yep.
Right. So there's all these things. And it's that old bromide about that you don't step into the same river twice. Right. And
Yep.
it's not that the river changes, we change.
It's also interesting. First of all, for the audience, if you're not watching the video, Bob has about 1,000 books in his library in the background that you can see. So as we've talked about in the past, Bob has worked on him. He's not just writing books; he has worked on himself a lot over the years. And the other thing I think is when I go back and look at my notes, it's interesting to see in books, okay, I read this 5 years ago and I highlighted these things. What was I thinking then versus what am I thinking
Exactly.
now? It's almost like a different way of journaling and reflecting where was I in 2017 and what was I thinking about. So I really
Oh,
like
it's
your
beautiful.
comment about that.
Yeah.
I want to shift gears a little bit. And what was there anyone else or any piece of advice or anything that really influenced you in your journey to, becoming a go-giver that who was really impactful in this journey for you?
So, first, I was very, very fortunate to have two parents who were the embodiment of this. So I got to grow up seeing, the two most precious people in my life live life this way. But I'd say when I got into business and I first began in sales, and I floundered at first because I had no formal sales training, and then I, started studying it and got pretty good at it. And a couple of years later, I went to another company and was selling a high end product, and I was having trouble with it. I was in a slump, and I kind of couldn't get out of the slump, and what I did is I made a young salesperson's mistake, and that is trying to get out of the slump. I was focusing on the slump, and I was focusing on me making the sale instead of taking care of my customers and clients, which would break that slump naturally, right? And so one day there's a gentleman who worked at the same place. He wasn't in the sales department. I think he was an engineer, and he retired soon after. I didn't know him very well, and he didn't say a whole lot, but he was one of these people, we've all known people like this. He didn't say much, but whenever he did say something, it was always profound. And luckily, he saw me as kind of Joe in the story that, I'd co-author 20 years, 25 years after that or whatever,
Uh-huh.
because this is 40 years ago, this is a long time ago. And he saw me as that, young, ambitious, upcoming, but person who was not realizing his potential, whose focus was not in the right place. And he said to me, Berg, he was a last name kind of guy. He said, Berg, can I give you some advice? And I said, yes, certainly. I need it. Please do. Right? And he said, Berg, if you want to make a lot of money in sales, he said, don't have making money as your target. Your target, he said, is serving others. Now, when you hit the target, you'll get a reward. And that reward will come in the form of money. And you can do with that money whatever you choose. But never forget, he said, the money is simply the reward for hitting the target. It isn't the target itself. Your target is serving others. And what that told me, my epiphany, if you will, right, was that great salesmanship is never about the salesperson. Great salesmanship is never about the product or service, as important as those are. That's never what it's about. Great salesmanship is about the other person. It's about that person whose life you are trying to add value to. It's really, I guess we could most accurately say, it's about that person whose life is better just because you are part of it. And I think, Phil, that when we approach sales from that foundational premise, then we're really 9 steps ahead of the game in a 10-step game.
I love that so much. And first of all, just like being a go-giver and serving others, it's fulfilling and it's profitable, as you said. And I would just encourage people, just trust that. Just trust it. Trust that it works, right? It might not work and might not give you a result tomorrow or next week or next month. Just trust that serving others, it's the right thing to do and it works out for you long term.
And you know what I find, again, that's great advice. And what I find interesting is I think it takes more, if you're going to, I think it takes almost more belief, if you will, to think that people would do business with you if you weren't a go-giver. And here's what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Again, understanding that people aren't going to buy from you for your reasons, but rather for their reasons. The salesperson whose attitude is, I just want to get that person's money, I don't care about serving them. To think that you can actually do really well with that attitude, to me, that takes a lot of faith because it's probably not going to happen. Don't get me wrong. You can be financially successful that way, but it takes a lot longer, actually. And it's a lot of hard work. You can have customers that way. It will happen, but you won't have loyal customers. You
And
won't have repeat customers. You won't have referral sources or personal walking ambassadors. You'll constantly be having to change your territory and change what you're doing because you haven't built it in a way that people want you to succeed. Because remember, you're not doing it for them. You're just doing it for yourself. So to me, it's harder to believe that, that way. When you have let's say you're doing it the go-giver way, what are you doing? You're focusing on that person. Again, there's nothing self-sacrificial about it. You're focusing on that person because, as you said, it's the right thing to do, but it's also what's most likely going to create that benevolent context for them to
yep.
want to buy from you.
Yep. And I think the way I think about it is like how you frame the questions you ask yourself, especially if you're thinking about strategy, is your strategy, how am I going to get this sale or get this money? Or is it, how am I going to go serve this group more? And if you serve them and you ask those questions and that's how you build your strategy, I think you'll have success. So the other thing I like is when you talked about your mentor and unrealized potential, we talk about it. I think it's so important to be a person that sees unrealized potential in other people and serve them in that way, but also surround yourself with people that see unrealized potential in you. I think is so powerful. It sounds like you did that many years ago.
Sure.
So
Oh, yeah.
congratulations on that. I want to ask a couple of closing questions here, Bob. The first one is, if you just step back and reflect on your career and what you do, how does that make you feel?
How does it make me feel? I mean, I think to the degree that, I've accomplished certain things that are, that have made a difference, I feel great about it. But I think there's also things that I think I could have done and accomplished more. And, I'm a human being, so those things, I don't feel as good about. I could, say, oh yeah, well, I have no regrets. I have regrets. There's things if I had to do over again, I'd do differently. But all in all, I think I've been very fortunate and feel good about a lot of it.
Well, I think it's worked out pretty well for you, Bob. So, and
Thank
I
you.
really like that answer. We talked about key factor of success. What I hear is being a go-giver and serving others. I see a lot of books in your library there, and maybe this is just the office, and who knows if there's a ton more books
No,
elsewhere.
actually, it's a good point because I always said this is one small part of my life. I always say my house is comprised of books with some scattered furniture. So yeah, this is one small part of it.
What have been outside of your own, which again I will reiterate and help people find that. What have been maybe one or two of the most impactful books that you've read?
Well, there's so many. It's difficult in a sense to come up with any. One that was, and if you don't mind me turning my back for just a moment, and I
Please
apologize.
do.
This one I read in the 1980s. Um, and it's made a huge difference. It was written in 1960 by Dr. Maxwell Maltz, called Psycho-Cybernetics. And you can kind of see the cover. It has trouble staying on at this point, but this was the first book I read that taught me the concept of belief systems, these subjective truths, that unconscious operating system we live by that pretty much dictates everything in our life. We all live our lives based on a certain set of beliefs that we unconsciously accepted before we were old enough to begin questioning questioning premises and asking why and so forth. And so we see the world in a certain way, right? And everything we do operates as though the world is that way, and it isn't necessarily so. It's simply how we see it. Well, the to me, the big takeaway is you can never accomplish anything greater than your most limiting beliefs. Right. So the first thing we typically have to work on is our personal belief system and consciously ask ourselves, is this thing that I believe regarding the way life is that serving me and serving others, or is it not? So this was a book that, what to me was a very big.
I definitely like the topic of just limiting beliefs. And honestly, it's hard to take sometimes, like we as humans limit ourselves so much to what we
Oh,
can really achieve. And I said it, I think last week, but we underestimate what we can do in 10 years. We overestimate what we can do in the next 6 months or 12 months, but we underestimate what we can really do over the next 10 years. And if we think about a lifetime, we're so limited. And I think it's important to continue to think about that and let your mission of what you want to do or what you want to accomplish evolve and grow over time.
yeah. Oh, I agree.
Well, the other thing I'll point out for the audience on the video that I'm seeing is as he pulled out the book, there was 10, 20, 50 pages of sticky notes. And like you're studying, you're not just reading these books, you're studying them, you're understanding them. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Bob, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say another one of my favorite books was written in 1910 by Orson Swett Marden, who is considered by many to be one of the founders of the personal development movement. He was the founder of Success Magazine, actually, and it's called Peace, Power, and Plenty. Which, to me, the peace part is the inner peace. The power is the inner power, not power over others, power over ourselves and our own emotions. And then plenty, of course, is prosperity. So everything in here is just a gem. And it's a magnificent book.
And I trust, given that's over 100 years old, there's just some foundational principles there that just do not change.
Oh, absolutely. It's every page in here is a gem. I couldn't even write in the book. I think it's a first edition or something. So I just made all the notes on
I think all of your books are twice the thickness of what the original purchase was, Bob, because you have so many notes and sticky notes and stuff in them. Bob, this has been so much value for me. Again, not just this discussion, but over the last several years. So again, thank you. How can people find out more about you, what you're doing? Where would you like to direct them?
Probably the best place to go is just BurgBurg.com. While they're there, they can subscribe to my daily impact email, which I send out 5 mornings per week. And really everything from there, they can just find. There's information on our Go Giver Success Alliance mentorship community. We have a sales conference coming up, a 2-day sales conference called SalesWise Live 2024. So, got all sorts of goodies there. So if they go to Burg.com, they can pretty much find everything.
Awesome. I really encourage people to check out Burg.com and definitely get the Go Giver book. There's a whole series on this, by the way. So I highly encourage everyone to do that. Bob, thank you you talked about daily impact email. Thank you for the impact you've had on so many people, so many books sold. This is like darn near 5-star review, 10,000 5-star reviews on Amazon. I mean, unbelievable impact that you've had. So we really appreciate all you've done and definitely appreciate you coming on the show. For the Moeller Real Estate and Business Podcast, we're signing off. Thank you for listening to the Moeller Real Estate and Business Podcast. We hope you found today's episode helpful. If you know current or aspiring investors or entrepreneurs or anyone that would benefit from today's episode, we appreciate you sharing it with them, or better yet, providing us a 5-star review. To learn more about Moeller Real Estate, visit our website at www.moellerre.com. You can also sign up for our newsletter or local events via our website. In closing, I encourage you to be purposeful in all areas of life, educate yourself, network with others that have been successful, take action, and lead. Thank you.